How would you prepare to teach 40,000 people instead of, you know, the largest course that you guys may have taught? Design considerations or delivery considerations, and what difficulties do you think you'd encounter? So we'd just like to open it up for a minute. Anybody kind of have any ideas about what might be different?
Well, you got to figure out how you're going to communicate with that many people.
Communication's a big one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Feedback loop is big time. You have 40,000 people expecting to hear something, right?
So you do have lots of communication, but how do you sort out what's useful communication?
Right. Right, exactly. How do you pick what you're going to answer or focus on? Anything else here?
One of the things that I would wonder about wanting to have, knowing that my own teaching style is interactive as possible, what happens when I try to interact with, when I want feedback and I want engagement, but I can't handle 40,000 individual people emailing you multiple emails every 5 minutes.
Right, right.
So is there a structure for that? I think that's part of the feedback loop point, right?
Good. And I think that's a good segue because that's kind of where we started to hear. Here's us. So our planning considerations here, I think we'll just talk, we'll do maps really quick and then we'll hand it to energy. Do you want to do the?
Sure. So I'll talk more later about my direct experience in designing content and some of the things I did to make and break my class. Sometimes deliberately, sometimes not deliberately. And my course was really simple. I wanted people to learn how to make maps. Maybe people were using them all the time, but they've never made their own. So really gateway kind of course, and ideally drawing some interest into the World Campus programs that I direct for the Department of Geography.
And so I was a learning designer on the maps course, sorry, with Anthony.
Yeah.
And then these two were the learning designer on the energy course.
Which is why they're over there. And that's
yeah,
why
we kind of just separated ourselves
so
here.
aligned with the slide, because we're in the boundaries.
Yeah, we'll go back and forth with the maps and energy. So energy-wise.
So for the energy course, this course was intended to, and will be actually, a 3-credit course. This is going to be part of a certificate program that we have being built in Dutton. There's one course that's already built in that series, and this one is going to be built as well. So what we wanted to do was to see if we could build a course in Coursera and then be able to use that same content in another way as a Penn State course. So originally we had 3 instructors. It ended up being 2 instructors. So there were some things that had to change here and there as we were developing the course.
So just, can we ask questions?
Oh yeah,
Sure.
go ahead.
So I know, Anthony, I've been asking you about, when you build one of your mapping courses for a 3-credit course, then your response to me was, well, that's kind of, not many people doing a MOOC point dash kind of engagement. And now on the energy side, that's what we're talking about doing.
Yep.
Like some dialogue.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about the differences in content and depth in the class and length as well. And the energy MOOC is definitely a lot bigger scope than what I tried to chew off. And I think.
Yeah, ours was definitely longer as well. So the MAPS MOOC was 5 weeks long and ours was 8 weeks long. So we were able to fit a little more content into ours.
Yeah, we've got a slide about how much content was in each one, so you can see that it's a pretty decent contrast between the 2 MOOCs because they had very different purposes. We had different goals going in, so the end result was very different.
And I think with planning considerations, I mean, you need to understand what the actual goal or the outcome is, not just for the people learning, but really for the university. And that's why we started with, okay, energy, 3-credit course, that's what we knew what was going on. Maps was much more of a 1-credit equivalent, but let's just generate some interest kind of thing. So understanding that going in is what actually starts to shape all of the planning and design considerations going through. So, getting into design considerations, on the MAPS course, the biggest thing that Anthony wanted was some interactive piece each week, and he wanted them to make maps. That was, you know, the overarching, let's make a map, let's have them do something hands-on each week. You want to talk about the
Yeah, I felt like it was really important to have a component of something that's totally self-directed in terms of motivation, where you were doing something each week in addition to learning about fundamental concepts and all the stuff that I really wanted them to know. I wanted that to take place in some kind of interactive environment where they could share and develop artifacts of that experience. And so I worked with a big company called Esri that is sort of the Google of geographic information systems. And they have an online tool that I worked with their education team pretty closely to make sure that it could scale to tens of thousands of people around the world with lots of varying constraints, works inside the web browser, and has some nice social sharing tools built in too. So the mapping is somewhat simple, but still good, and definitely added a nice element to the course.
So, as you can see, the course was originally based off of a video series, Earth the Operator's Manual. As we were kind of working through things, we encountered some difficulties with the producer of the video. So we kind of changed tactics a little and did more about the content than the videos and made the videos supporting content. Richard Alley, who's the instructor of the course, wanted to make the course about the topic and not about the politics. And, you think about energy and, sustainability, it's a fairly hot button issue. And we did cover some controversial topics in our lessons, like the Marcellus shale industry. And also, again, the course was developed to simulate a 3-credit course. So we tried to follow the format of a majority of the courses at the Dunn Institute. We tried to keep it 12 lessons long and tried to figure out a way to make that fit into the 8-week frame.
So some weeks we actually had the students do 2 lessons in 1 week. So, and that was a little difficult for some of them to take. We had a lot of complaints about that, but in the end it worked out okay.
We just want to talk about the backward design process. This is what we do at the Dutton Institute, which the Dutton Institute is the e-education outlet basically for the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences. We handle all of the design work for courses coming out of the College of EMS. We focus on a backward design. So basically we're identifying what the outcomes or the goals, overarching goals are for the course first. What do we want them to learn? And then we say, okay, so based on that, what things do they need to learn along the way to get there? What are the objectives to learn that? And you basically plan it out backwards, so then you have the lesson objectives, and then you understand what the topics will be, because you already know what they need to learn. So instead of coming up with topics first and then saying, okay, the goals for this lesson, you actually have goals for lessons and come up with topics. Anything with you guys with this, or can I? No, okay. Good. Chris alluded to this a little while ago. This is the involvement continuum description. This is kind of how we think about designing wise, based on what the faculty member actually wants to do. How involved do they want to be? You guys talked about, I want to be really engaged. I want to talk in the forums all the time. Somebody like Anthony wants to do that. Somebody like Chris wants to do that. That's their style. There's other people who say, well, all right, I'll give you the content, but I don't have time to do that with all of my other commitments. And that was kind of the style that Richard took on this side. So this is where you're going to see a couple divergent processes here in exactly how we were designing the course. Because with Anthony saying, I'm fully involved here, then that made the design process much more different than these guys that had to figure out how to get things across without as much, total involvement.
Yeah, one of the biggest concerns that Richard had is the scalability part of being involved. So he was concerned that he was going to get, tens of thousands of emails every week from students, and in reality that may not be the case. I mean, you'll get a couple, but I think most MOOC students are fairly self-sufficient.
And Richard kind of fell on the involvement by proxy. So what we did is we had a bunch of us checking out the discussion forums and finding things that he needed to respond to. We would send them to him, and then he would respond to them. So it's not that he wasn't involved at all, because he was fairly involved, but it was just somebody else was kind of
Filtering.
weeding through and filtering everything and sending him the stuff that really mattered, and then we were handling the other stuff. So he kind of fell in the second line there.
I'd classify myself as extreme involvement. With the caveat here is that this thing in parentheticals about is released from other responsibilities is total BS. That was not my experience.
It should be.
Yeah, like should be ideally, yeah, including 6 months afterward when you have to do 45 talks about your class. So there's a whole like afterglow period where that is also applies. But I actually really liked the challenge posed by a lot of assumptions around MOOCs, which was that it's not possible for you to be deeply interactive with your students. I felt like, okay, well that sounds like something I want to try to challenge. I wasn't unrealistic. I didn't expect to talk one-on-one with 48,000 people, but I'll show some examples later of how I approached this and how I learned on the fly, how to be extremely involved without also being one-on-one with everybody.
And there was still just 24 hours in his day
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
All right, so we like to say we just broke Coursera, and then we like to say, where did the typical
We just
move?
broke
Maybe we
the
just-
presentation. There you go. Really good at that.
And that was a continuous issue process along the way. Coursera was pretty new. We were the first MOOC, I think, off, weren't we?
No.
No, the
Art.
second MOOC, yeah,
Yeah.
Art was first.
Yep.
So the two of our MOOCs, I think, we challenged the system based on our design, because we were not designing like a typical MOOC tends to be. So this slide is just to show you the differences. A typical MOOC tends to be an hour-long video lecture, and some assessment like a quiz that's just got the multiple choice things, or there's quizzes inside the video. Very light on content. There's not really any discussion requirements or threads or peer assessments, things like that. Everything's just done. The instructor's not there. That's not the way that we chose to do it. We chose to do it more like an online Dutton course, simply because that's where our things could go afterward. So we had text lessons, so much more on the content heavy side of things. And then we did short videos. So Anthony had 2 videos in each lesson, one that kind of introduced the topic, and one that talked more in depth toward the end of it along the way. And those were 5 minutes, 10 minutes long, maybe
Yeah,
tops.
less than 10.
But if the person did not watch the video, they didn't miss anything. Everything was in the text that needed to be there, that mattered. Required discussion participation, which we found interesting with people who've taken MOOCs before, because it was never a requirement to them before. And then in addition to those auto-graded quizzes and things, we actually did a peer review assignment in ours. So.
What do you mean by peer review assignment?
Do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Coursera has tools that, and other MOOC platforms do too, that allow peers to grade each other's assignments. And you can use that for things that have much more qualitatively different outputs. So in my case, there was a final map project that students could decide on their own what they want to do. So the possible range of outputs is almost infinite. So I create a rubric, and then students are assigned automatically sets of things to review to check each other's work.
This
and
stops
there's-
Anthony from grading 48,000 maps.
It's not going to happen. Yeah.
So you set it up as a peer review, and they submit an assignment, and they grade 3 other
Yeah,
assignments.
you can
and
give them
that's how-
examples of graded assignments, you can calibrate that, there's all kinds of fancy things you can do. Yeah.
I have a question. Did you group the students?
Did I,
Did we group?
did I group the students?
Yeah.
No. I read all about Georgia Tech trying to do that. Failing miserably. No, I didn't make any effort to try to group students. That kind of thing is not well supported by the tools that we have to use in something like Coursera. I mean, how do you deal with participation in that case? I would strongly recommend avoiding until those things are much better sorted out. Coursera doesn't actually have anything in there built in that I ever saw that allows you to try to group students in some kind of way. You can imagine a future where that is possible. I can certainly imagine that, and I think that would be effective, potentially, at keeping people motivated, but right now, it would require you as the instructor to try to manage that manually in some way or semi-automatic, and that's a disaster waiting to happen.
For the most part, they tended to group themselves. So I know
Yeah.
in our MOOC, we created areas in the forum where students can connect with other students who are near them. So we did
Birds
based
of a
on
feather,
countries or
or
based
location.
on whatever the student tells us that they wanted, a subform on, and they can connect there.
And we had a lot of teachers in our MOOC. So somebody had said, can you create a discussion forum for teachers so teachers can hook up and talk? So we broke them down into like the elementary, middle school, K through 12, college teaching. And there was quite a bit of activity going on in there because people were interested, and there were people that were planning to be teachers, and they wanted to talk to them about, well, how would you cover this kind of stuff for elementary school children versus, you know, because a lot of people that are taking MOOCs have graduate degrees. So it's a very different kind of environment on how you would teach somebody at that level versus, you know, somebody that's 9 or 10 years old.
So another way we broke Coursera is through the navigation structure that we decided that we wanted to adopt. So Coursera's typical navigation structure is really simplistic and sometimes, I guess, for our purposes, not great. So we'll show you a picture after this slide of what it traditionally looks like and what ours looks like. So their navigation has, I guess,
Just go to it, yeah.
yeah. So this is their navigation. You can see on the left-hand side, you see all the links to the content. Again, most MOOCs are very text light, so they don't necessarily have too many pages of actual content. Most of their stuff is through the videos. So this is their video page, what a typical video page, and a MOOC would kind of follow this structure. Students would go in, they'd go to the video lectures, they would watch the lecture, they would take the quiz. Since our MOOCs didn't fit into this format, we actually kind of built out our navigation differently. So what we did is on the left-hand side, we had one link to go to each week or to each lesson. And again, had we listed all of the pages in our MOOC on the left-hand side like a traditional MOOC does, you know, and the Energy MOOC had like 110 pages, so you would have 110 links down the side. That really wasn't effective. So we made one link to each lesson, and then we had navigation across the top. And all of that stuff we had to hard code in, because there's no easy way in Coursera to do that, and it was a challenge trying to figure out the most effective way to navigate through our content.
Yeah, so Coursera's default is to group by content type, not by the pacing of the class or by a concept of lessons. That's what you see in the default view. And so it's completely antithetical to how we design online classes at Penn State. We have pacing in the class, we have weekly concepts of those things, and they can involve all kinds of content types. It's not, here's all the videos for this class, and here's all the lecture notes for this class, and here are all the assessments. So we really had to flip their model on its head and then do a lot of this hard coding. Like in my class, Erin designed a similar thing across the top. So you go in each lesson and then you could navigate to the next page inside this, which broke the software a lot.
I was gonna say hourly.
Yeah, sometimes
The
we
first
would,
couple
like
weeks.
within 5 hours, it was somehow not working again. So we had constant maintenance of that just to keep that structure. It does seem like today though,
It's
they're
much more
learning a
stable.
lot from those experiences, so now you can roll out pages, individual pages like this on certain days. That's another aspect of an organization that was hard. There was no ability for us to time that rollout. We had to manually do it. Whereas if you use their content model, which emphasizes videos and other things, you can have those things show up at Wednesday at midnight or whatever. But we had to manually do this. So like
We literally sat in an
Erin and I
office
would
every
sit
Tuesday.
together on Tuesday afternoons and manually do it, and I would check real time as fast as I could to make sure everything was working, because half the times the links would break when we would publish the page.
Yeah.
And that's just, their software was crappy. I mean, so we were dealing with like triage to roll out each week.
Chris?
So one of the things I wonder about, and I'm sure Coursera can against this, but would there be a way to organize the course according to principles of mapping that you're trying to teach, so that you're actually
Sure.
drilling down into, you know, somehow using those same principles you're articulating to as the organizing metaphor for the course?
Yeah, and when I have the chance a little bit later, I'll talk about how competencies relate to the design of my class and a little bit about the
Yeah,
lessons
he's gonna
themselves.
go more in depth from the instructor
And we're gonna
point
have-
of view.
We're gonna
Yeah,
have to move
toward
really
the end.
fast.
The thing with Coursera is when we started, I don't think they'd ever seen or really worked with learning designers before, teams with learning designers. It's always just been an instructor comes in, uploads a video, doesn't need a design process, doesn't need anything. And so you know, as we're bashing here or saying it was breaking all the time, they really worked with us to say, how exactly are you guys doing this? What are you, okay, let's, you know, so it was constantly us and going through Derek and saying, this isn't working, and they were pretty quick to add things or update things for us. So, like we said, we were one of the first two. It was breaking all the time. By the time, you know, ours ran in July. By the time theirs ran in January, they weren't running into 3/4 of the issues that we did when we ran.
But I mean, it sounds like their model was more of the model that Coursera was used to, which is, seems like the more of the old school model of the presenting material from the expert and letting it trickle out.
They still did the pages like we did, though. I mean, they still have the lesson content pages and things, which Coursera just didn't understand. So you can see, like, right here we have weekly lessons, and if you click lesson 1, 2, 3, something that we learned on the fly that was a big thing is we initially had lesson 1, and then we had each of those pages listed. Well, there was no way to collapse them, so by the time you got to lesson 3, people are having to scroll down several times. You know, we saw the complaints come in between lesson 2 and 3 and fixed that immediately, and everybody was like, okay, thank you, it works now, that's better.
Yeah.
That's something that I think Coursera hasn't really fixed yet, is being able to collapse, you know, the set like that and have the pages. But
And I guess aside from the system limitations that Coursera had, there was a fairly steep learning curve as far as students. We've had students that somehow made it to lesson 6 of our MOOC
And never used the
and
navigation.
never understood how to navigate to the sub pages. So we don't know how they completed their assignments, but so there is a little bit of a learning curve there as well.
So there's a couple different ways that you can handle video as well, since we obviously didn't just use the video lectures page. We wanted to keep the videos inside our content pages, because why should we tell them to go out to the video lectures page and then come back to the content, try to find where they were, etc. So you can do videos with embed code like this. I think this is the most common way. This is like a YouTube video that's just embedded straight into the page. The problem with this is there's a lot of countries, China being the biggest one, that doesn't allow YouTube. So if you embed a YouTube video, the people in China can't see it. So that starts to become problematic. So what we did around that was we created the videos in their system, put them in their system, but then coded it so that a light box popped up and it stayed on that lesson content page. You can see the lesson content page still behind it. So the video popped up in the page. When they were done, they could just close it and they didn't leave the content. And that's another thing that Coursera just wasn't doing. It was kicking you out to the video lecture page, and then you had to come back and find your place inside your lessons. So that was another thing that we kind of learned along the way. It's like, great, you can embed it here, but if you can't see this, you know, it needs to pop up and things too. So while you can kick out to YouTube videos, if you're making your own videos, it is much more user-friendly to keep them inside Coursera.
Yeah, for both of our projects, licensing concerns around WPSU produced content and the content inside that content made it impossible for us to host those things inside Coursera's video system. So I had to link to Geospatial Revolution videos that I did not produce, but WPSU did, on a YouTube page, and just heavily encourage students to find alternative sources that would work in their countries. So that's a difficult thing. The students will scream at you about, how did you not think about this? And I'm like, well, I didn't know that Bangladesh prevents you from seeing things on YouTube. Also, I'm not the president of Bangladesh, so I can't decide that and change that. I don't know, I own the right to the content. It's really non-trivial to deal with that. With our lectures that we created, then you can put it in their system, it's no big deal. So anything you make is accessible. If they can get to Coursera in the first place, then they're good to go.
Assessment decisions?
Well, for our MOOC, we had 12 quizzes, and they're self-graded, so that was just kind of a no-brainer to do that, because anything that's self-graded in there is just lovely. And then we also had a participation score, and so we had some activities that we had students do the activities and post to the discussion forums, and then talk about them, because our course was very US-centric. But most of the people that were taking the course were not from the United States. So what we decided was to make those activities international. So we would have the ask a question and ask the student to go out to resources in their country and answer those questions. So by doing that, we were able to internationalize the course without actually having to think of every country and the entire world and try to find that information. We also had required discussion forums if they wanted to get the certificate with distinction. And so that, so those discussions were based on the content. And we tried to be very, very explicit in saying, keep your responses based in science, not in opinion. And because this was a course on climate change, and everybody's got an opinion on that. So we were trying to make people focus in on that science and keep it in the science.
With the MAPS courses, it was a 5-week process or 5-week course, and we chose to keep the same structure every week so that they knew that there was a quiz, or the last week was an exam a little longer. There was a discussion assignment, and there was a mapping assignment. They knew that there were the same things each week, just for that. So we made sure to keep the design the
And
same.
again, just to reiterate, most of the MOOCs, you know, that are out there don't require any discussion participation. They have discussions, but it's never a requirement for points. And that's where our 2 MOOCs differed from that traditional model. We required discussions, and that prompted a large number of concerns from students who have been experienced in MOOCs previously and wanted to, you know, remain somewhat anonymous in their learning. So that was a topic of discussion that kind of went through the entire course.
And we actually ended up altering our requirements for the basic certificate for that, to allow people to do that. So they just had to do the quizzes and a couple of activities, and they would get the points for that certificate.
But as far as the required discussion, you didn't have any way to make sure that everybody's discussion was actually on topic?
No.
No.
All you can do in Coursera is say they posted X number of times. And I'll show you how I dealt with people complaining about that.
So what we
he's-
told
If we
He's
can
got a
get to the
great
slides.
example if we get there.
Yeah, it is something though. It's better than nothing. And in my experience teaching the class, it definitely added a good element to the course, even after the complaining people went on to other free things that they could complain about.
Yeah, so we made it fairly explicitly clear to students that somebody, and we had a number of TAs, would be spot checking the forums. We're not going to be reading every single post, but we'll pick X number of posts a day and look at them just to make sure that they're relevant. And any of them that were not relevant, most of our TAs, you know, replied or put some sort of statement that says, hey, make sure that your things are on topic.
So the biggest thing to know, since we kind of just went through the entire design and delivery process, is you can have a great plan and a solid design and creative materials. Does that equal sound delivery? In a MOOC, that's really the big question. How do you end up getting there? Things will go wrong, so just stay calm, stay flexible. That's the biggest thing. You take yourself a little too seriously, and you can go down pretty quickly. So just quickly, we're going to talk about some lessons learned about the students and about the actual design process and things. The background, especially the culture, the age, the experience level, varies greatly compared to normal college courses, and that's even normal non-traditional students in our online courses. I mean, this is just a vast difference, and there's 40,000 or 100,000 or, you know. They take the MOOCs for various reasons, so some might just be taking it to self-fulfill. Others are, you know, are there because their boss said to do so. So some might want a certificate, some might say, I'm just trolling the material and I'm getting done. So you don't have any end goal of, I want an A.
Or they're just trolling.
Or they're just trolling, exactly. Or it could be like me that signed up for the Duke course just so I could take a screenshot of their stuff. So I'm skewing all of the statistics in the Duke course right now. Students are very perceptive in some aspects and not in other aspects, and Anthony and a couple of us were talking yesterday, that it's probably the ones that are very perceptive are different from the ones that are not very perceptive in some of this stuff up here. But you will have typos pointed out to you. You will have grading issues pointed out to you. Anthony and I were saying we had to open manually the course each Tuesday. Well, technically it was supposed to open at 7 p.m., which was midnight UTC, Greenwich Mean Time, and we'll talk about that too. But we were opening it at like 3 p.m., just not telling people we were opening it. And as we're opening it, we're getting notes saying where things are broken.
Yep.
I mean, people were in there immediately telling us
So
what was
soft launching is an important strategy, but it doesn't actually protect you against someone going, yeah, but I tried it just now and it didn't work. I'm like, yeah, we're
It's like, cause I'm still on
in
the
the
page.
process of opening it at the moment. So there's no time in which you take care with your class where nobody is there. There's always maybe hundreds in that thing, so there's no,
There's no downtime.
somewhere in
because
the world,
is-
somebody
yeah.
is, like, this is the perfect time for them to be in the class. So as you play around and tinker and change the course, you get nailed.
But I'd love to hear eventually how you dealt with that publicness. Because
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of publicness we're not used to as faculty members.
Right,
right.
And, you know, I can post a blog post and know nobody's gonna be reading it for at least a while, I'll tweet it, you know, and then maybe I'll send some people there. But if they're on it right away.
Yep.
that's
They're,
all-
yeah, they're on it, and they,
And
you know,
also with the criticism, I mean, you gotta deal with that.
You have to be extremely thick-skinned.
that's the whole be flexible and stay calm. I mean, you're just gonna, if you sit there and take yourself too seriously, you're just gonna find yourself in a corner shaking somewhere. So that's,
And don't
that's
take
really it.
anything personal.
Other students aren't very perceptive, and they will ask, like I said, it took 6 lessons for people to figure out navigation in some instances. You still have the students that don't read the syllabus and don't read the due date, and then will still contact you. He killed so many grandparents in
Yeah.
a 5-week period.
Killed thousands of old people toward the end of my class.
I
Yeah.
mean, just like the regular students, you know, my
So-
grandparent died, can you open this back up? And
Yep.
he's sitting here going, it's a free course, like, no.
The best email I got before the class began was somebody who wanted to know, like, where the class was being taught on campus.
Yeah.
So they were, in their
Getting ready to
head,
come
they
to
had signed up for
Pennsylvania.
something where they were gonna come and see me personally. And I was like, whoa, yeah, that's not how this class works, but it kind of terrified me that anybody could possibly put that together in their head, like, oh, I'm gonna come to Penn State for this class now. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works.
So lessons learned for designers, now that we've scared you a little bit, and this is the reason we asked you the questions at the beginning, what do you think you needed to worry about in scale and all this other stuff? Really, developing a MOOC is not that much different. I mean, you still have to think about all of the best practices. Just remember to relax and observe, and you'll see some really awesome stuff occur inside it, but you just have to let it happen. You have to know that you can't fix everything for anyone, you know, for everyone. It's just there's too many people. Balancing expectations with what the students are willing to do, that's something that you guys,
Yeah,
guys
that's
struggle
what
with.
we learned with the certificates, because we ended up setting the bar pretty high, and we really had to alter our expectations and bring that bar down pretty low. So, and we still set it pretty high for the,
In comparison to a typical,
yeah, for a typical MOOC. So for, if you wanted to get the kind of enhanced certificate, you had to do 84% of the stuff in the MOOC. And that's evidently a lot. And the other one was a lot lower than that. But we really had to, and you have to do that stuff on the fly, because when you get complaint after complaint, well, this is too much work, I'm gonna leave the course. You don't want people to leave the course. So we were just flexible enough with it and changed some things, and they were much happier then.
yeah, and
We
the only
got
other
support
thing,
from the students from that.
the only other thing I'd touch on is to set the time limits for yourself, because
yes.
if you get too involved, you will head down that rabbit hole and you'll find yourself still there at the end of the workday, or at 2 o'clock in the morning, or,
Yeah.
you know, wherever Anthony
I don't,
happened to be.
yeah, I don't care about setting time limits for myself, teaching the class, because it's not, that's like, sounds amazing,
Well,
but
we
it's-
still
I just
had
don't
like
even-
9,
yeah.
10 other courses each that we were dealing with in
Yeah,
addition to the MOOC.
I have an entire
we-
program I operate at the same time, and it doesn't, I found it really motivating to have the class go. I mean, that much feedback from people around the world caring about my topic that I'm passionate about was incredibly motivating. So I'm not complaining about that, I'm just saying, setting a time limit on it was like great in theory, but I could not personally do that, and I won't be able to do that when I teach it again starting next month.
This is the extreme involvement continuum thing right here. But lessons learned about content, one of the biggest is use international measurement and time standards. I think it was funny that Dan Pink downstairs was talking about the international measurements and things like that. We're a minority. I know that we think that the U.S. is, you know, the center of the universe here, but
Sorry,
we're
Brazil.
really the minority.
Not me.
So making things US-centric will just tick off the entire rest of the world. Even if you make things East Coast time, you're going to tick off the West Coasters. So it's a lose-lose in that aspect. So if you use Greenwich Mean, UTC time, that thing, that's the international standard that everybody bases where they are off of. That stops that right then. So if you set midnight, you know, for things to release UTC time, that's 7 p.m. here. If you set it for 7 p.m. there, you can make it 2 p.m. here. Because when we're rolling things out and we're having to do it manually, you don't want to set your thing for midnight Eastern time, or we're sitting there at midnight Eastern time trying to make things work. So it actually helps out that way. Anticipating issues, yeah.
Just to underscore that point, I got these statistics for the energy course just yesterday, and the total registration or the participants in the energy course from the United States, just 21%.
Yeah,
It's a very diverse international grouping of students.
it's like 30% of my class.
And I think you'll find that around, throughout the MOOC process.
We upset a lot of people by using Fahrenheit instead of
Yeah, we
Celsius.
did.
Yep.
Fahrenheit was
Yeah,
really bad.
Fahrenheit, Celsius, weight measurements, things like that, all, just think about that. Deep linking of materials or files, we linked out to a lot of stuff, but linking to things that people have to download constantly, depending on where they are in the world, it's just not gonna work. We have some that are like, well, my internet is only turned on for 2 hours a day, or our electricity to our village is turned on for 2 hours a day, that kind of thing. So file size, deep linking, that stuff.
And making sure that where you're linking to has the broadband to support 40,000 people going there, because we crashed multiple people's servers and,
Yeah.
and so that's not necessarily a good thing, and they'll keep moving the document to different places so you can't get to it, so it's like hide the document kind of game, so.
So I have 5 minutes to talk about making and breaking my class. More specifically, we already talked about some of the goals in my class, and just my motivation is probably to teach people how to make maps in a much, much larger context than I'm able to impact normally. We talked earlier about how the class was designed, so a lot of text, other types of content, not just lecture video centric. And I wanted to point out one thing that is important here is that in my field there's a large body of knowledge around core competencies in geography. And so Erin and I did a lot of work with that body of knowledge and understanding about what people can know about GI science and mapping, and tried to take for each lesson things that I really wanted to cover and work backward from those goals. So I have kind of an accounting now of each lesson and competencies I was trying to reach. I want to talk a little bit about video lectures, because for me that was really different. I've never done those in online teaching before. 2 lectures for each lesson, less than 10 minutes each. I produced them on my own with a teleprompter, and that's the only piece of equipment we bought, because I actually used my SLR at home to shoot these. So I really like this part because it's something I didn't get to do, and I have a studio at home and a photographer, so for me it sort of spoke to some things I like to do. But one thing I thought was helpful that I would recommend to someone else teaching, I really struggled with the idea of scripting everything like it was the Weather Channel, because that's not how I teach a class, just like I'm doing right now. I would have such a hard time writing a script, and I got all kinds of advice, like, oh, you have to go to WPSU, and you have to write everything down and time every statement and slow down when you talk. We bought a teleprompter, and I put slides up in that teleprompter that I made for my lectures with very simple stuff on them to prompt me. And so I gave a lecture to the teleprompter as I would give it, as close as I could give it, and in all but 2 cases managed to do 1 take. So there are little tiny warts that I would maybe change if I was being super anal about it. 2 of them we split in half, where I did a better job in the last half, whatever. But that method for me worked really well and helped me not feel as awkward about creating this really milquetoast, vanilla, crappy version of myself. And a lot of people seem to fall over with that in MOOCs. I've seen a lot of teaser videos recently that are really bad because people are not being themselves. And so sometimes a little technology purchase can help you a lot to be yourself when you're doing these types of things. The course was certainly very large. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it was the biggest course in my discipline to date. And one thing I'm very happy about is about 9,000 people were still in there at the end, doing quite a bit. I have no idea what's going on right now, so that's cool.
You can just exit full screen.
Why you guys use this thing? I use PowerPoint. Here's a density map real quickly of some of the, this is self-reported locations in the class, about 22,000 of them in aggregated hexagons. Shared this map back with the class so we could talk about the geography of the course. That's something that's not possible in a small class. And there's really cool conversations like French people had about why is it that, okay, every time we use laser it busts it. Okay, cool. So, I won't do that
Use
anymore.
your finger.
Yeah, so French people talked about why is it there are not many French people, but there's tons of people from Spain. We had a cool discussion in the class about the dynamic of the class itself, which is sort of a meta level thing that can only happen in a MOOC. Made me very, very excited, as you can tell. Engagement was extremely high, so there are more than 200 posts in this particular thread about a concept around normalizing data on choropleth maps, so area filled with colors like election maps, for example. If you don't normalize data and give population or make some rate out of it, you end up with population density maps of anything you can imagine. And people took this stuff and ran with it. I didn't expect them to go deeper, but this one student posted, here's some examples I saw at work of this exact thing. We were looking at the world in a totally incorrect manner, and that caused more than 200 other examples to emerge from other students saying, yeah, oh my God, I had no idea. I was seeing this problem everywhere all the time and not recognizing it. So I was very impressed at the level of engagement that was possible. Here's an example of a final map project, a story map based on a Longfellow poem. So a really cool synthesis of mapping and the humanities here. And this particular student, a couple weeks ago, tweeted and said that they got an inquiry from National Geographic because of this map they made inside my MOOC. So yeah, all right. So it's not just people watching lectures and then walking away, and it's not some crappy thing that's going to take over education either. It can be pretty neat. Another kind of outreach that I think is important, I had quite a lot of journalists who took my class, and I'm sure Matt had some in his class as well. I'm sure there was some in Energy MOOC. And journalists are interesting people because then they'll contact you afterward and say, can I write stories about those things that I learned in your class? And that's what happened with this. I talked a lot about the dangers of using spectral rainbow color schemes to represent phenomena because people don't see, purple as inherently more than green or anything. You have to learn that, and it's very awkward. And this person from Pointer contacted me and said, can I write a story about this? Because I'm kind of blown away that I see these kinds of things happen in journalism all the time. So that happened. Really nice side effect. I won't spend a lot of time on survey results, but quite a lot of people agree with the statement that the course encouraged them to think about geography in a new way. And a decent number of, almost a third, more than a third out of the people that responded to the post-course survey said that the class did motivate them to take more coursework in geography with a certificate or degree program, which as a degree program leader, that's really important for me. I really want to emphasize tactics in MOOC teaching. This is one of my big takeaways for this kind of audience. Response time matters. So basically you're strategic when you're designing the course, and then you have to be tactical when the class actually operates. It's not that different than any other kind of teaching, except that I felt it a lot more deeply in this experience. If you change things on the fly, which I know we both did in energy class and the maps class, I was updating stuff constantly. Erin and I were doing things. Thousands of people will see improved content that night and that day, the next morning. So you don't wait till the end and say, next time I'll do a different lesson. Make your different lesson happen now. Instructor posts, things I said can draw a ton of attention to issues, and that can be really good or really bad. So somebody complaining, this came up earlier, complaining that they don't like the free thing you made for them, it's really irritating. If I responded to that directly, it could sometimes result in hundreds of students hammering that student. So it's maybe the response in the other direction was not really what I wanted to have happen, so you're gonna be really careful. It can also be helpful to direct conversation around cool examples. Neutralizing negativity is not very easy, but here's an example of how I did that. You can't read it very well, but this thread is one I started called Post Here about how dumb my discussion grading policy is. And I put that in an off-topic area in week 1 because I was getting a lot of people who said, I've taken 3 MOOCs and you never grade discussion, that's not fair, and you don't know how to design a MOOC. And I said, my class, and I design online classes, and most people doing MOOCs have never taught online once. So, and the rules are definitely in flux, so don't quote rules about norms. Also, it's my class, so welcome to college, dude. This is how things work at university. This is why you don't go to McDonald's for your education. So what I did was I started to just really push people over to this other thing and say, okay, here's your place to tell me how stupid I am. And I suck all the wind out of the trolls about this stuff. And if people are really crazy, and I only have like one person who is really aggressively nuts, you can just nuke them. They're not paying you to do anything. And one of the most liberating things about this is you can just ban somebody from your class or Coursera by clicking your mouse. So you don't need to suffer fools at all, which is kind of nice.
And what was great was this counted as their discussion posted.
Yeah, and I pointed this out over and over again. I'm like, by the way, every complaint you have is just something that gets counted toward your participation grade. So I find it deeply ironic to complain about it like this. I did a lot of interaction with the class, and this is a thing about that I think makes the class really good. I posted about 1,000 times in 5 weeks, and I spent 2 to 4 hours every single day of the week, sometimes more, sometimes less, usually in the evenings, to do that. 3 examples of on-the-fly adjustments that worked for me. In week 3, I did something called Ask Me Anything, so I kind of ripped off how Reddit does AMA stuff, but I did it inside the class. And I said, you have 4 days. I created a new forum totally for this thing. Post whatever question you want me to answer, and then I'll go through the top voted questions as much as I can, like on this certain day for 4 or 5 hours. And generated like, I don't know, 450 threads, something like that. A ton of interest in that. And it was a way for people to participate without doing Hangouts, which require video stuff. Quite a lot of people in MOOCs have no way to do streaming video very well. So it does, that self-selects a small part of the audience, plus it doesn't deal with asynchronous types of things. Created a bunch of off-topic forums. I did weekly discussion digests, so all that reading I was doing, I tried to find and lift up good stuff that I thought was worth attention, and every Saturday I posted a thread set that had like 20 examples of things about lecture, things about other concepts, and then potpourri, like random stuff I thought was cool. I would seed that too. On-the-fly adjustment that did not work, I tried to appease some complaining students who wanted more time on peer assessment, and that broke the whole peer assessment tool, kind of threw the class into chaos for a couple hours. Don't do that. So we're already out of time. This sucks. I would say the end message here is make it fun. Tendencies toward homogenized, kind of junky, vanilla MOOCs. A lot of people will give you that advice. My students reacted really positively to things I did to try to make it fun. So I created like fake names for places. You won't be able to see them here, but like a map of heat. I talk about Dulles agates or Chuchalupas or whatever it might be. Make the examples fun. I also did some silly stuff with Easter eggs, like in the video. There's, after the second lecture and beyond, there's this guy who shows up behind me, which is one of my coworkers who hates attention. And so we have little like foam avatars of him. It's just a stupid office joke. And so he appears behind me and gets smaller and smaller and smaller as the weeks go on. And within the first like 24 hours of class, there were people posting like, what is this creepy guy behind? And there were all these theories about he's actually standing there and I was in front of a green screen. It was amazing. Like, great, crazy stuff. And one guy in the forums posted, they actually sleuthed it and figured out exactly who this person was. He has almost no internet presence, which is why he's perfect to troll with this kind of thing. But you can do fun stuff with a class like that. It does not have to be homogenous. I think with that, we should stop since we're already over time. Thanks.
Thank you.